Some encounters change lives. Others transform destinies and redefine what it means to truly live. For 12 years, I was a shadow among those who dwelled in the light. My weakened body, my stolen dignity, my hope reduced to almost nothing. But there was a moment, so brief yet eternal, that changed everything. A touch. An act of faith that defied cultural, religious, and fearful barriers. Today, I share my story so that you may know, the impossible can be reached, but only when we dare to believe. My life before the bleeding was simple but full of meaning. I helped my family, sewed clothes to sell in the market, and dreamed of a future. But everything began to change when the bleeding started. At first, I thought it was something temporary, a matter of weeks. But the weeks turned into months, and the months into years. The illness didn't just take my health, it took my identity. As a woman in our community, being considered unclean was more than a physical limitation. It was total exclusion. I couldn't go to the temple or participate in celebrations. I couldn't touch anyone, nor be touched. Gradually, my presence became invisible, as if I didn't exist. My house became my prison. A small mud brick structure with a single window facing the street. From there, I watched the world continue without me. Children running, women carrying water jars, men discussing business in the market. The sounds of their interactions filled the emptiness of my home but also amplified my loneliness. I tried everything to find healing. Every doctor, healer, and ritual that promised relief took the little money I had. But nothing worked. I remember one healer who rubbed herbs on my hands, muttering words that felt as empty as the hope in my heart. "This should fix it," he said. It didn't. On one of the darkest nights, I knelt on the cold floor of my house and looked up at the starry sky. "God, do you still see me?" I asked, tears streaming down my face. Silence was my only answer. This was my life, a cycle of pain, shame, and prayers that seemed to go unheard. Then, one day, I heard voices outside. 2 women were hurrying by, speaking with excitement. "He's here. Jesus of Nazareth is here. Did you hear what he did in Jericho? He healed a blind man. And the paralytic? He made him walk." My heart raced. I had heard of Jesus before. They said he didn't just heal but touched lepers, ate with sinners, and welcomed the outcasts. What if he could accept me too? But almost immediately, doubt crept in. "You are unclean," a cruel voice whispered in my mind. "He would never want to know you." Yet there was another voice, quieter but persistent. "What if he can?" I spent hours wrestling with myself. The idea of approaching him felt both desperate and impossible. My condition was known. People in the market knew who I was. If they recognized me, they might humiliate me, shout at me, or drive me away. But the thought of missing this chance was even more painful. It felt like this was my one opportunity, a singular moment in a life of suffering. The next morning, I covered my face with a veil and wrapped myself in a dark cloak. The heavy fabric seemed to intensify the day's heat, but I knew it was necessary to avoid being recognized. I stepped out of my house with hesitant steps, my heart pounding so loudly it seemed to fill my ears. When I reached the market, the sound of its bustle engulfed me like a wave. People pushed carts, shouted prices, and children darted between stalls. In the distance, I saw the crowd surrounding Jesus. The noise around him was different, more reverent, more urgent. Then, I heard his voice for the first time. It wasn't loud or commanding, yet it carried a weight that made everyone around stop and listen. "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Those words pierced my soul. He's speaking to me, I thought. But the crowd surrounding him felt like an impenetrable barrier. Men and women pushed and shoved to get closer, each seeking their own healing, their own answer. I knew I could never reach him directly. Then the idea came to me. I don't need to speak to him. I don't need him to see me. If I can just touch the edge of his cloak, that will be enough. That thought grew within me, giving me a courage I didn't know I possessed. I bent down, trying to weave through the crowd unnoticed. My hands trembled, and my heart pounded so loudly it drowned out the surrounding noise. Dust from the ground clung to my face and clothes, rising with every step. Each movement was a battle. Finally, I was close enough. His cloak swayed gently as he walked. It was now or never. With one last effort, I stretched out my hand. My fingers brushed the edge of his cloak. And then, something happened. The moment my fingers touched the edge of Jesus's cloak, something indescribable occurred. It wasn't just a physical sensation. It was as if something invisible and powerful surged through my body. A warmth flowed through my veins, followed by a wave of relief that seemed to strip away years of pain, exhaustion, and shame. In an instant, I felt completely restored. My heart raced, and tears streamed down my face. I touched my own body, trying to confirm what I already knew deep within. I was healed. The bleeding that had plagued me for 12 years had stopped. Strength returned to me, like a tide filling a dry riverbed. I fell to my knees, my hands covering my face as sobs of gratitude overwhelmed me. He did it. He healed me. There was no doubt. No room for fear. But before I could slip away, Jesus stopped. In the middle of the crowd pressing around him, he simply stopped. The murmurs quieted, and his clear, firm voice echoed. "Who touched me?" My breath caught. He knew. The disciples exchanged puzzled looks. One of them, probably Peter, responded in a tone of mild exasperation, "Master, there are so many people touching you. How can we possibly know who it was?" But Jesus wasn't satisfied with that answer. He scanned the crowd, his expression calm yet resolute. "I felt power go out from me," he said, as though calling for the person responsible to come forward. Panic gripped me. The shame that had momentarily disappeared came rushing back. "Run," my mind urged. "Leave before anyone notices," but something stronger than fear held me there. It wasn't just that he knew, it was his gaze. It seemed to pierce through the crowd and find me exactly where I was. I knew I had to confess. It was me. My voice came out low, almost inaudible. The crowd parted around me, forming a circle of curious and judgmental gazes. People murmured, some with surprise, others with disapproval. My knees trembled, but I gathered every ounce of courage I had left and continued. "It was I who touched you," I said, my voice now steadier. I have suffered for 12 years. A flow of blood. No doctor could heal me. I lost everything I had, but I never lost my faith. I believed that if I could only touch the edge of your cloak, I would be healed. My words hung in the air, and the crowd fell silent. I looked at Jesus, bracing myself for reproach or indignation. But what I found was entirely different. His eyes were filled with compassion, with a love that seemed to see beyond who I was, or who I thought I was. He stepped closer, and with a voice soft yet firm, he said, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be free from your suffering." Daughter. That word echoed in my heart like a melody I hadn't heard in years. For so long, I had been called unclean, rejected, cursed. But at that moment, he called me daughter. Tears streamed down my face as my legs gave way. I fell to my knees, not out of weakness, but out of gratitude. The crowd seemed to fade away. All that existed was that moment, those words. As Jesus began to walk again, followed by the multitude, I stayed where I was. My eyes followed his steps until he disappeared from sight. Still kneeling on the ground, I felt the warmth of the sun on my face and the weight of the dust beneath my hands. But none of that mattered. My body was healed, and my soul was restored. As I stood up, I noticed that some people were still watching me, but their gazes no longer bothered me. I was free. For the first time in years, I felt whole. I walked back home in silence, my heart overflowing with gratitude and reverence. There was no more fear, no more doubt. Only an unshakable certainty. My life had changed forever. When I returned home, every step felt like a miracle. My feet, once heavy with weakness, now felt light. My back, once hunched under the weight of pain and shame, was now straight. But something even deeper had changed, my soul. For the first time in 12 years, I felt seen, not as a problem or an impurity, but as someone of worth. That afternoon, I sat by the window of my small house, watching the movement of the marketplace. The world looked different now. I was no longer a spectator, separated by pain. I was part of life again. Then I heard a faint knock at the door. I hesitated for a moment. It had been so long since anyone sought me out that I almost didn't know how to respond. When I opened the door, I saw an elderly woman. She was bent over, her hands clasped together, and her eyes shone with anxiety. "Are you Miriam?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I am," I replied, trying to read her expression. "I was in the crowd today. I saw what happened. You were really healed." I nodded, a shy smile forming on my lips. Yes, I was healed. After 12 years. He restored me. The woman covered her face with her hands, and tears began to fall. I have suffered from pain for years. My joints. I can barely walk. Do you think he would do that for me too? I gently took her hands. They were cold and frail, as if carrying the weight of many decades. I looked into her eyes and said, "He saw my pain, my shame, and my faith. He called me daughter. And if he did that for me, I believe he can do it for you too." The woman nodded, silently sobbing. "I want to believe," she murmured. "Then start with that," I replied, squeezing her hands firmly. "Believe that he sees you, even when no one else does." She walked away, her steps slow, but there was something different about her posture. As I watched her disappear down the street, I felt something new stirring within me, a calling. My healing wasn't just for me. My story needed to be shared. In the days that followed, word of what had happened at the marketplace began to spread through the city. People spoke of it, some with admiration, others with skepticism. What surprised me most, however, was how people began seeking me out. Not just to hear my story, but to share their own pain and hopes. One of those people was Ruth, a young woman who appeared at my door holding a small basket. She hesitated before speaking, as if deciding whether she should even be there. "You're Miriam, aren't you?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "I am," I replied, inviting her in. Ruth sat down slowly, clutching the basket in her lap. "I heard what happened to you. I'm trying to believe that it's possible. But what if he doesn't hear me?" I reached for her hand, remembering the fear I had felt before touching the hem of Jesus' cloak. "I was afraid too," I admitted. "For years, I believed my pain was invisible, that I was insignificant. But Jesus saw me. He didn't just heal my body, he called me his daughter. He accepted me. And if you take that step of faith, he will hear you too." Tears began to stream down Ruth's face. "I want to believe," she said, her voice trembling. "That's all he asks," I replied. "That you believe." It wasn't just Ruth. Others began to come as well. An older man I recognized from the marketplace approached me with hesitant steps. He carried a basket of grain, but his eyes were weighed down with doubt. "Do you really believe he can help anyone?" he asked, his tone almost challenging. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "He sees more than our flaws. He sees who we truly are. And he is willing to restore us if we allow him." The man was silent for a moment, then nodded slightly and walked away. These encounters began to shape my new reality. I was no longer the woman who lived in the shadows of shame. My healing was a gift, but it was also a calling. Each person who came to me reinforced a profound truth. My story had a purpose far greater than I had ever imagined. And so, I began to share my journey, not just as someone who was healed, but as a witness to the power of God. The next morning, as the sunlight streamed through my window, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: purpose. For 12 years, I had lived like a ghost, trapped in pain and shame. But now, my life was different. Jesus had done more than heal my body. He had restored my soul and given me a new identity. I was a daughter, a living testimony of his compassion and power. When I stepped outside, the sights and smells of the marketplace felt more vibrant. I walked with firm steps, without the veil that had once hidden my face. I knew people were looking at me, some with curiosity, others with skepticism. But for the first time, their gazes didn't bother me. As I passed one of the market stalls, a child ran up to me. His eyes sparkled with curiosity as he held his mother's hand. "Are you the woman who touched Jesus?" he asked, his voice filled with innocence. "Yes," I replied, kneeling down to his level. "Is he really that good?" I smiled, gently touching his hand. "He is even better. He sees us, even when we think no one else does. He loves us just as we are. The child's mother nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. "Thank you," she said, holding her son's shoulder firmly before walking away. As I continued my walk, I noticed more people watching me, and some began to approach. Among them was a young woman who hesitated before speaking. "I've heard about you," she said, her voice trembling. "Do you think he would do the same for me, even after everything I've done?" I looked at her, seeing the pain and doubt in her eyes. "Yes," I said firmly. "He doesn't just heal our bodies, he restores us. He sees who we truly are, not what we've done. If you take that step of faith, he will see you too." The young woman began to cry, and I embraced her, something I hadn't done in years. "I want to believe," she murmured. "Then start with that," I replied. "Believe that he sees you." My story didn't end the day I touched Jesus' cloak. In truth, that's when it began. The healing I received was more than physical relief. It was a complete renewal of who I am. My mission now is to share what happened to me, not to glorify myself, but to show that no one is beyond God's reach. Every person who comes to me carries a story. Some come with physical pain, others with wounds in their soul. And to each of them, I say the same thing: he saw me. He can see you too. One afternoon, as I spoke to a small group in the marketplace, an elderly man approached. He seemed hesitant, but his eyes were fixed on me. When I finished sharing my story, he asked, "Do you really believe there's hope for someone like me?" "Yes," I replied without hesitation. He did not reject me. He will not reject you. Just take the first step. The man nodded, a small smile forming on his lips. In his eyes, I saw something I recognized, the beginning of a faith that could move mountains. Today, as I share this with you, I hope you understand that the same touch that changed my life is still available. It doesn't belong only to the past, it is for everyone who has the courage to believe. My life was transformed by a moment of faith, but my mission continues. As long as there is someone willing to listen, my story will be told. If this story touched your heart and left you inspired, take the next step to deepen your faith and strengthen your spirit. Discover the transformative virtues of the women of the Bible with our ebook, The Virtues of Women in the Bible, Timeless Lessons from Modern Life. Learn how women like Hannah, Esther, Abigail, Ruth, and Mary overcame extraordinary challenges with unwavering faith, wisdom, and love. Qualities that can guide you to overcome your own challenges and live with greater purpose and joy. Simply scan the QR code on the screen or click the first pinned comment to access your copy today. Let their timeless lessons become your guide to a brighter, more fulfilling future.